So last time we talked about money as a communications tool. As you said, not only for prices, but also for communicating. It's been used to communicate other forms of value as well. And one of those being, I guess you could say propaganda is kind of a distortion of value, or the attempted distortion of perception or values and others. And I wonder if we could talk a bit about that, when and how money has been used as propaganda throughout history.
Well, I think one way or the other, probably ever since there's been money, it's been exploited for propaganda purposes. And some, propagandizing good governments, and other times propagandizing not such good governments. Mm-hmm. But you're right. We took money is a form of communication, and we talked about the first the cable, the first cable under the Atlantic, and the price being communicated across the cable by telegraph, I suppose it was. And then they knew that the two bodies on either side of the cable were reputable, and therefore they were able to agree the first exchange rate between US dollars and the pound. And and as communication technology has evolved, so has money. And I think even if you look at something like Bitcoin today, one of the reasons it's been able to go is, the internet, instantaneous communication, copying and sending links and so on. So there's that side of communication to money. There's also the side that it communicates. And by the way, we talked about propaganda and money. Like Bitcoin, it's completely voluntary. But it's one of the most effective propaganda campaigns ever invented in the history of technology. As soon as somebody invests in Bitcoin, suddenly they're a Bitcoiner. You've got your little Bitcoin tattoo on your arm. Everyone's got their laser eyes. I've spent the last couple of weeks, as you probably know, projecting these messages on the outside of the Bank of England, much to the amusement of everybody. And, these are all different forms of propaganda. So, Bitcoin's as guilty, if that's the right word, of propaganda as any other money system has been.
Yeah, it's a meme machine, right?
Yeah, but memes are propaganda. But another form of communication that money is essential for is the communication of value. And, if something costs this and something costs that, human beings understand all sorts of things by that. And of course, we talk about stuff, but often what we do says more about what we think than we actually say. Right. And what is communicated in prices informs what we do. Mm-hmm. And it really is essential to an economy that its money is sound, and because if the money isn't sound, then the value of stuff is going to be, there's going to be all sorts of false information in there. Mm-hmm. And we all know how fiat money pumps up asset prices and pumps up housing prices, and it's just distorted messages. So we talked about truth, but if you want a truth to be communicated, then the money must be sound. There's this relationship between soundness and truth and beauty. But then coming back to the issue of propaganda, with the very first coins that were stamped, they were usually stamped with the heads of gods. And then I suppose the sort of crossover point was around about the time of Alexander the Great, one of the first empires of early times, if you like. And I think he reached as far as India on one side and Carthage, which is, East Africa, on the other side. So it's pretty extensive from east to west, his conquest. And everywhere he went, he would take the existing money, melt it down. Wherever he conquered, he'd raid the gold and silver vaults. He'd melt, particularly in Persia, he did this. He'd melt the money down and then remint it with a stamp of, on one side it would be Hercules, and on the other side there would be varying bits of information. But the image of Hercules that was portrayed on his coins was remarkably similar to Alexander himself. And so he would portray himself in the likeness of, the Greek god of strength. And so that was the first. And then I think a couple of generations after Alexander, by that point, they would then start stamping coins with Alexander's head. But by this point, you know, when he's been dead for 2 generations, you know, what was you know, he's gradually achieving godlike status.
Right. Yeah.
You know, if you think of your sporting heroes, you know, the best I don't know who the best basketball player is today, but, you know, or the best, you know, Joe DiMaggio, for example, the great baseball player of maybe the 1950s, is it?
Yeah. Sounds right.
So he already has this sort of godlike status, doesn't he? He's no longer just a guy who hit balls. He's and so, you know, the sport, and, you know, Pele was just a football player, a very good football player, but by the time 2 or 3 generations gone, and suddenly he's a god.
Yeah.
So I think the same applies. You know, you might just be a man, but by the time myth and legend and history, and they all get confused. That's how gods are born.
Yeah.
And then, you know, eventually you would see, like the Romans, for example, and I love this story. The Romans would stamp their coins eventually with the heads of emperors, and often when a new emperor had come to power, they would stamp a coin with one emperor holding a globe and passing that globe to the new emperor. The old emperor passing the globe to the new emperor. So I think, for example, the coins of Trajan did that. Mm-hmm. Now, there's 2 interesting things to notice there. Firstly, it shows that the Romans knew the world was round, because, you know, the globe symbolized the empire.
Way before Columbus.
Way before Columbus. Yeah. And I think that flat earth theory that everyone thought the earth was flat, I think that's been debunked, actually. But it certainly seems that in the Dark Ages, certain people stopped believing that the earth was round. It definitely, I think there is some truth to that. But anyway, so you see, so the Romans would, you know, communicate the fact that there was a new emperor on their coins. And, you know, so, and the coins stamp is always, even today, you know, the US dollar is stamped with the heads of great rulers. You know, George Washington is no longer just a bloke. He's a god in the eyes of many of American legends.
Yeah.
And so you would have George Washington, or I don't even know who's on your coins anymore, but certainly George Washington, and maybe Benjamin Franklin, and
Abe Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson. That's all that comes to mind. Benjamin Franklin. Yeah, but Ben Franklin's the $100 bill. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a means of, so money is used as propaganda in that respect. And coming back to Greece and Rome, and then Byzantium after Rome, and the Islamic Empire, and pretty much every empire in history, if you plotted the greatness of that empire on a graph, and you plotted the soundness of the money of that empire on a graph, the two would coincide.
Right.
And I've been trying to figure out in my head, is it failing to keep the money sound that leads to the decline of the empire? Or is it the decline of the empire that leads to failing to keep the money sound? The two seem to dance together. I don't know which causes which, or, you know, is it causation or correlation? I don't really know.
Mm-hmm.